They say a man's home is his castle, but I never realized my wife was trying to storm the gates with a Trojan horse wearing 6-inch heels and a designer dress. My name is Richard, and I've spent 30 years building a real estate empire that spans 3 states. I'm a man who understands contracts, loopholes, and the fine print. But when it comes to my wife, Kimberly, I thought the only contract that mattered was our marriage license. I was wrong. Kimberly is 20 years my junior, a woman of sharp ambition and even sharper cheekbones. Lately, she had been acting cold, distant, and obsessed with the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement. It's a nasty little piece of legal work. If I'm caught cheating, she gets the $5 million estate in the Hamptons and 40% of my liquid assets. If we just drift apart, she gets a fraction of that. It was a Tuesday evening when the trap was set. Kimberly told me she was heading out for a girls' night to clear her head. An hour later, her best friend, a stunning blonde model named Tiffany, showed up at my door. She claimed Kimberly had left her keys inside and was supposed to meet her here. She was wearing a dress that left very little to the imagination and had a bottle of expensive bourbon in her hand. "Richard," she purred, stepping into the foyer before I could even say hello. "You look so lonely in this big house. Kimberly says you're always working. Don't you ever just play?" I'm 60 years old, not dead. I could see exactly what was happening. Tiffany was being overly touchy, her hand lingering on my arm, her scent, something heavy and floral, filling the room. But as an expert in negotiations, I noticed something else. A small, blinking green light tucked behind the books on the coffee table. A hidden camera. Kimberly hadn't just sent a friend over. She had sent a professional honeypot to film my downfall. Tiffany led me to the sofa, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. She leaned in close, her lips inches from mine. "You know, Richard," she whispered, "Kimberly doesn't appreciate what she has. A man like you. A man with power. You deserve someone who focuses all their attention on you." She was laying it on thick, almost too thick. It was a performance. I looked into her eyes, those bright, piercing blue eyes, and I didn't see passion. I saw desperation. I saw a woman who was checking her marks, making sure she stayed in the camera's frame. I realized in that moment that Tiffany wasn't just a co-conspirator. She was a tool. And in my experience, tools can always be repurposed. I took a sip of the bourbon, leaned back, and looked directly at the hidden camera, then back at Tiffany. "Tiffany," I said, my voice calm and low, "how much is she paying you to do this? Because whatever it is, I guarantee your best friend is planning to stiff you on the bill the moment she gets my house." Tiffany froze. The sultry mask slipped, and for a second, I saw the terrified girl underneath the makeup. She looked at the bookshelf where the camera was hidden, then back at me. Her hand started to shake. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her eyes were darting toward the exit. "Sit down, Tiffany," I said, and this time, it wasn't a request. It was the voice I used in boardrooms to signal that the game was over. "Let's talk about the fine print of Kimberly's plan. And then, let's talk about a much better deal. One where you don't end up as a witness in a felony fraud case." I watched her chest heave as she processed the fact that the old man wasn't as easy to fool as Kimberly had promised. The air in the room changed. The seduction was dead, replaced by a cold, calculating reality. I knew right then that the next hour would decide who kept the estate and who ended up on the street. Tiffany sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, the glass of bourbon rattling against her perfectly manicured nails. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. She looked at the bookshelf, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and terror. She knew she was caught, but more importantly, she realized she was caught by the man who held all the cards. "She told me you were just a lonely old man with a checkbook," Tiffany whispered, her voice cracking. "She said you wouldn't even notice the camera. She promised me $100,000 from the settlement if I could just get you to touch me on film." I let out a short, dry laugh. "100,000? Tiffany, my wife is about to sue for a $20 million payout. She's offering you less than 1% to commit perjury and fraud. In my world, we call that a bad investment. And knowing Kimberly, the moment that check clears, she'll have her lawyers find a way to sue you to get that money back. She doesn't have friends. She has assets." Tiffany looked down at her hands, the reality of her bestie's betrayal sinking in. "I'm in debt, Richard. My modeling agency dropped me, and I have rent I can't pay. I was desperate. She knew that. She used me. I leaned forward, placing my own glass on the table. Desperation is a powerful motivator, but it makes you sloppy. You're lucky I'm the one who caught you and not a private investigator who would have you in handcuffs by morning. Now, here is the counteroffer. You're going to stay here tonight. But we aren't going to do what Kimberly wants. We're going to give her exactly what she thinks she wants, while we rewrite the ending of this story. What do you mean? She asked, her blue eyes flickering with a spark of hope. We're going to perform for that camera, I said, a grim smile spreading across my face. We'll make it look like a passionate affair, but we won't break a single law. We'll whisper, we'll laugh, we'll move out of frame. And while Kimberly is at her girls' night, watching the live feed and celebrating her victory, you and I are going to sit in my office and draft a very specific set of documents. You're going to give me a signed, notarized confession of her solicitation for fraud. In exchange, I'll pay you double what she promised, not from a settlement, but as a consultant fee for security services. Tiffany's breath hitched. You do that? Even after I tried to ruin you. I don't care about the attempt, Tiffany. I care about the result. Kimberly wants a war, but she's brought a knife to a drone fight. I want you to go into that kitchen, grab a bottle of wine, and come back here looking like we're having the time of our lives. Let her watch. Let her feel the weight of the house in her hands. Because tomorrow, the walls are going to start closing in. Tiffany stood up, smoothed out her dress, and took a deep breath. She was a model. After all, she knew how to play a part. As she walked toward the kitchen, her hips swaying for the benefit of the hidden lens, I pulled out my phone and sent a one-word text to my lead attorney. Initiate. For the next 3 hours, we put on a masterpiece of a show. We sat close. We whispered. We toasted to the future. To anyone watching that grainy green-tinted feed, it looked like I was a man hopelessly captivated by a younger woman. I could almost hear Kimberly's triumphant laughter from whatever hotel lounge she was hiding in. She thought she had the silver bullet. She had no idea I was the one who manufactured the gun. Around midnight, we moved to the study, the one room I knew was clean of her surveillance. Tiffany sat at my desk, the pen trembling in her hand as she began to write the truth. Every promise Kimberly made, every instruction on how to seduce me, every detail of the plan. As she wrote, I watched the live feed on my monitor. Kimberly had just logged off. The trap, in her mind, was sprung. Is this enough? Tiffany asked, handing me the 3 pages of confession. I scanned the documents. It was better than enough. It was a digital and physical execution of her claims. Get some sleep in the guest wing, Tiffany. Tomorrow morning, we have a very important meeting with my loving wife, and I want you to be looking your absolute best. The morning sun hit the Hamptons estate with a clarity that felt almost clinical. I sat in the breakfast nook, sipping black coffee, watching the driveway through the security monitors. Tiffany was upstairs, dressed in a sharp, professional blazer she'd borrowed from the guest wardrobe. She didn't look like a honeypot anymore. She looked like a witness. At exactly 9 a.m., Kimberly's silver convertible screamed up the gravel path. She didn't just arrive, she invaded. She burst through the front doors, her face a mask of practiced tragedy and cold triumph. She was clutching an iPad like a holy relic. Behind her was a man I recognized instantly. Marcus Thorne, a shark of a divorce attorney who specialized in high-conflict asset seizures. Richard, Kimberly shouted, her voice echoing off the marble foyer. Don't bother lying. I saw it. I saw everything on the cloud feed. How could you? In our own home? With my best friend? I didn't get up. I just lowered my newspaper and looked at her over the rim of my glasses. Good morning, Kimberly. I see you've brought company. I hope Mr. Thorne likes his coffee black, because that's all I'm serving today. Thorne stepped forward, dropping a thick manila envelope on the table. Mr. Sterling, we have the footage. High definition, time-stamped, and legally obtained under the security provisions of the marital home. Your infidelity is documented. Under the terms of the prenuptial agreement, we are here to discuss the immediate transfer of this property and the liquidation of the stipulated assets. We can do this quietly, or we can make this the lead story on page 6. Kimberly leaned over the table, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. I wanted to love you, Richard, but you're just another cliché. An old man who couldn't keep his hands off a pretty face. I've already called the movers. I want you out by noon. Noon? That's a bit tight, don't you think? I asked, finally standing up. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up a remote control. Before we start packing my bags, why don't we review the masterpiece you've created? I'd hate for there to be any continuity errors. I clicked the remote, and the massive 80-inch screen in the living room flickered to life. It wasn't the grainy green footage from the bookshelf. It was a crystal-clear, multi-angle view of the previous night, recorded by the actual security system I'd installed, which overrode her cheap hidden camera. "What is this?" Kimberly hissed, her confidence wavering. "This is the director's cut," I said. On the screen, the footage showed Tiffany entering, but it also showed me pointing out the hidden camera to her. It showed us sitting on the sofa, clearly laughing as we discussed the $100,000 bribe Kimberly had promised. And then, the audio kicked in. Tiffany's voice was clear as a bell. "She told me to seduce you so she could take the house, Richard. She said you were an easy target." The silence that followed was absolute. Kimberly's face turned a shade of purple I hadn't seen in nature. Thorn, the shark, suddenly looked like he wanted to jump overboard. That's a setup." Kimberly screamed. "She's lying. She's a failed model. She'll say anything for money." Actually, a new voice joined the room. Tiffany stepped down the grand staircase, holding the notarized confession we drafted at 2 a.m. "I'm saying the truth because I'd rather be a consultant for a billionaire than a scapegoat for a fraudster. Here's the contract you made me sign, Kimberly. And here's the recording of you telling me exactly where to hide the camera." I looked at Thorn. "Mr. Thorn, I believe conspiracy to commit insurance and legal fraud is a disbarment offense, isn't it? My legal team is already at the courthouse filing a countersuit for breach of contract and malicious intent. Under the actual fine print of our prenup, an attempted fraud against the estate nullifies all alimony and asset divisions. In short, she gets nothing." Kimberly lunged for the iPad, as if smashing the device could delete the reality of her failure. "You think you've won? I'll tell everyone. I'll ruin your reputation. Your reputation is the one currently on the chopping block, Kimberly," I said, my voice hardening. "Now, I believe you mentioned something about movers? Good, because they can take your things. But you're leaving in the back of a cab. Now." Kimberly stood in the center of the foyer, her world collapsing into the high-definition reality playing on the screen. She looked at Thorn, her high-priced lawyer, but he was already tucking his briefcase under his arm, his eyes avoiding hers. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and I had just blown a hole in the hull that no amount of legal maneuvering could patch. "This isn't over, Richard," Kimberly shrieked, her voice hitting a desperate, jagged note. "I spent 5 years of my life with you. I endured your schedules, your business dinners, your stability. You owe me. I owed you a faithful husband and a comfortable life, Kimberly," I replied, stepping closer until I was mere inches from her. "And I provided both. You, however, owed me a partner. Instead, I got a saboteur. You didn't just want a divorce, you wanted a heist. And in my house, we don't reward the burglars." I turned to Tiffany, who was standing calmly by the stairs. "Tiffany, I believe your car is waiting out front. Your consulting fee has been wired to the escrow account we discussed. Thank you for choosing the winning side." Tiffany gave a small, graceful nod. She looked at Kimberly, the woman who had tried to buy her integrity for pennies, and simply said, "You should have checked the resolution on your own camera, Kim. It was never high enough to hide your true colors." With that, she walked out the front door, leaving the silence to ring in Kimberly's ears. Kimberly turned back to me, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a weapon or a way out. "What now? You're going to throw me out on the street with nothing?" "Not nothing," I said, pulling a small, black suitcase from the coat closet. "I'd packed it an hour ago. You have your designer clothes, your jewelry, and the memory of a very expensive mistake. But the bank accounts are frozen, the credit cards are canceled, and the locks on this estate will be changed the moment your heels hit the driveway. My security team is waiting at the gate to escort you to the edge of the property." Thorn finally spoke up, his voice hushed. "Kimberly, we need to leave. If we stay, he'll have the police here for trespassing, and that will make the fraud charges look like a footnote." She looked at the suitcase, then at me, the realization finally sinking in. The old man hadn't just survived her trap, he had turned it into her cage. She grabbed the handle of the suitcase with a snarl, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. I hope you're happy in this big, empty house, Richard, she spat. You're going to die alone with your spreadsheets and your contracts. I may be alone, Kimberly, I said as the security guard stepped into the foyer to lead her out. But I'll be doing it on my own land, with my own money, and with a clear conscience. That's a luxury you'll never be able to afford. I watched from the window as the silver convertible drove away, followed closely by the black SUV of my security detail. The house was quiet again. The infidelity was a ghost, the fraud was a documented fact, and the estate remained exactly where it belonged. I sat back down at the breakfast table, picked up my newspaper, and took a sip of my coffee. It was finally, truly peaceful. Conclusion: the author's perspective. This story is a masterclass in the dangers of underestimating a person's intelligence based on their age or their silence. Kimberly thought she was playing a simple game of trap the old man, but she forgot that Richard didn't build a real estate empire by being naive. He understood that loyalty cannot be bought, but a betrayal can be countered with the right incentives. In the end, it was the honeypot herself who became the key to his victory, proving that truth is the most valuable asset in any contract. When you try to set a trap for someone else, make sure you aren't the one standing on the trapdoor. What a stunning conclusion to a game of high-stakes betrayal. If you enjoyed seeing Richard turn the tables on his treacherous wife, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. We bring you stories of sharp wits and hard-earned justice every week. Drop a comment below. Was Richard right to pay Tiffany, or should he have let them both fall? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.